Before I open it up for questions, I thought I'd read a little bit from my book. So this is my book, Fire of the Heart. If any of you would like a copy, you can get one at the end of the retreat. So this is a chapter. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I'm going to read from a chapter called Meditation is Not What You Think. Do you get it? Meditation is not what you think. It has a double meaning. So who is it that is thinking? What is thought and what is mind really? Is it not true that the only thought that we are actually aware of is the thought that is happening right now? Isn't that true? Mm-hmm. If we're having a thought right now, we're only aware of that thought. Despite the fact that so many of us complain and feel victimized by our busy minds, the truth is that we can only have one thought at a time. What a relief, huh? If we can have only one thought at a time, what exactly is mind? And where is it located? I have no idea. Apply yourself consistently to the practice of true meditation, accompanied by self-inquiry into the question, who am I? And it will soon become self-evident that what we refer to as my mind obviously has no substantial existence at all. And yet the vast majority of human beings never slow down enough to discover this fact. Much of what we habitually refer to as my mind is simply patterns of remembered perceptions in the brain. And where is the truth and the reality in that? If our true nature, as consciousness itself, is the source of all true intelligence and sensitivity, then why do we think endlessly? Even if we live a very balanced lifestyle, and we could reasonably say that we have transcended most of our physical and emotional addictions to the repetition and exploitation of experience, are we not still addicted to endless thinking? What is it that motivates and drives this almost interminable stream of thought that we are involved in? Consciousness is our irreducible identity that is prior to the appearance of mind. Mind is a modification of consciousness, like waves are a modification of the ocean. But when we fall from inherence in our true self as consciousness into exclusive identification with mind, we literally believe that we are what we think. You'll get it? So as soon as we forget that we are the ocean, we believe we are the waves. The ocean believes that it is the wave. And when we believe that we are what we think, we become bound to an insidious form of artificial intelligence. By artificial intelligence, I mean that instead of true intelligence, which is tacit, direct, intrinsically wordless, spontaneous, living contact with life and phenomena as they arise. We instead perceive reality through the symbolic representations of a language program that is conditioned by the past. It might appear strange to call the mind a language program because we presume that we only use language when we are speaking. But when we are not speaking and thought is occurring, we are effectively talking to ourselves. Thought is largely internalized language, even when it is in the form of imagery. Thus, when we perceive what is through the prism of mind, you all know what a prism is. Anyone know what a prism is? No. Prism is like, what's the Portuguese word? Prisma. There, that's what it is. Yeah. It's like a prisma. Are you alright, Jorge?
No, yes, just missing.
Okay. Let me read that bit again. It might appear strange to call the mind a language program because we presume that we only use language when we are speaking. But when we are not speaking and thought is occurring, we are usually talking to ourselves. Thought is largely internalized language, even when it is in the form of imagery. Thus, when we perceive what is through the prism of mind, our interpretation of reality is a representation of the past in the form of thought or internalized language. And this presentation of the past programs our brain and patterns our interactions with existence. So you understand what I'm saying? So mind is based on past. Right? So there's what is, and then if we perceive it through the prism of mind, what we're actually seeing is a representation of the past, which we superimpose on now. Right? So you meet someone, you know them very well, and you think you know who they are. So it destroys any kind of living innocence, mystery in the relationship. Just one example.
Okay. One question. We're talking about a prisma.
Prisma, yeah.
Not a prism. Okay.
Not a prison. No.
Okay. Prism. Yeah, okay.
Like light shining through.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
There is a famous line from a poem by Gertrude Stein that says, "A rose is a rose is a rose." The whole point being that every word is a symbol that points to, but can never capture or communicate, what the essence of a thing actually is in and of itself. Even though language is purely symbolic, when we identify with mind as self, we literally invent a symbolic destiny for ourselves through the repetition of particular stories, self-images, beliefs, and obsessions. We lose touch with the vibrant, fresh, ungraspable nature of reality as it is, and instead live in a mediocre, dumbed-down fog of familiarity. Is that clear? Through the constant representation of mental symbols, we concretize our self-identity and project that identity and its imagined destiny into an idea of time and space beyond the present moment. Hence, we could say that we all live in a virtual reality of mind, effectively self-identified with the artificial intelligence of a robot. This mind machine that replicates language thought forms and constantly represents the past creates the illusion of a substantial continuous I that we associate with the mortal body-mind complex of our embodied individuality. Looked at developmentally, we can see that our learning how to speak happened with the development of our verbal mind. This development occurred so that we could communicate in the expanding field of our relations as we grew up. But then, when there was nobody there to talk to, we became fascinated with this newfound capacity, and we kept talking to ourselves. We somehow got addicted to our own self-reflection in and through the verbal mind, through symbolic language, which of course became more and more complex as we grew up. You get it? So have you all heard of the myth of Narcissus? The Greek myth of Narcissus? Where narcissism comes from, the word narcissist. So what happens? He's walking along and then he sits by a pond. And he sees his own reflection in the pond, you see. And he becomes so fascinated, he loses all awareness of everything else. So that's a metaphor for what happens when we become fascinated with this self-reflection through the mind. Of course, there are many other dimensions to the activity of mind that are essential and valuable to our full expression and functioning as human beings. There is the functional capacity of mind that enables us to comprehend, plan, and deduct practically and rationally. There is the differentiating capacity of mind that enables us to discriminate and discern. And there is what we could call the intuitive capacity of mind that arises on the wings of a pure creative impulse and enables us to communicate, to paint, to make music, to dance, to write, etc. All of these forms of mental activity are signs of a healthy adaptation to life, in which the mind is employed as a willing servant or tool. But if we apply ourselves to a continuous process of true meditation and self-observation, we will probably discover that most of our habitual mental activity does not take any of these forms. Rather, it takes the form of us having an almost continuous conversation with ourselves. Get it? Now, does that strike you as somewhat crazy? Think about it.
Excuse me. Can you read again this lesson?
Yes. About the mind.
Yeah.
What, the thing about the part about the good aspects of mind, you mean?
That part I understood.
Okay,
Just
after that.
The last, yeah.
So all of these forms of mental activity are signs of a healthy adaptation to life, in which the mind is employed as a willing servant or tool. But if we apply ourselves to a continuous process of true meditation and self-observation, we will probably discover that most of our habitual mental activity does not take any of these forms. Rather, it takes the form of us having an almost continuous conversation with ourselves. Now, does this strike you as somewhat crazy? It must mean that our habitual mode of more or less continuous self-referential thinking is an addiction to the illusion of relatedness with someone who does not actually exist. When we dream at night, we multiply ourselves into all kinds of beings and scenes. But on waking, we realize that there was really no one there. That was just a dream. When we go into deep sleep, there is literally no one there. And what a profound relief and relaxation that is. Then we wake up in the morning, and if we've spent a long time with nobody there in sleep, We say, I slept so well. Can you imagine if we couldn't go to sleep at night? I think we'd all go insane. So let me read that again, because this is important, because who we truly are, our true nature as consciousness itself, that fundamental ground that we all share, it's always already the case through the waking state, the dream state, and in deep sleep. It would have to be, right? I mean, think about it. We spend 1/3 of our existence, probably more, in deep sleep, and we have no awareness of anybody, a world. There's nothing at all, right? So when we go into deep sleep, we're actually very close to our true nature. We kind of fall back into that ground, and it's actually blissful. It's bliss, you see. That's why we say, wow, I slept so well. You know, you don't kind of say, oh yeah, I had a really good blank last night. Do you know what I mean? It's a really good empty. Really good emptiness for 4 hours or whatever. It's like, oh no, I slept so well. Because there's something inherently blissful about sleep. Anyway, interesting. Let me just read this again. So when we dream at night, we multiply ourselves into all kinds of beings and scenes, right? When we're dreaming, the I who is the dreamer, the dream seems as real as the waking state when we're dreaming, right? Perhaps even more real in some ways. So when we dream at night, we multiply ourselves into all kinds of beings and scenes, but on waking, we realize there was literally no one there. So it's just an appearance, and you realize, oh, it was just a dream. And we all kind of agree, oh, that's just a dream, it's not really real. Right? We all kind of agree with that. When we go into deep sleep, there is literally no one there. And what a profound relief and relaxation that is. Then we wake up in the morning, and if we spent a long time with nobody there in deep sleep, we say, I slept so well. And then the artificial intelligence program immediately kicks into gear with its interiorized speech mind to continue the fascinating adventure or bad soap opera of me and my life in the waking state. Our addiction to our self-referencing interiorized speech mind prevents most of us from ever experiencing true aloneness, by which I mean true or oneness. If you think of the word alone in English, you think of or one. The mechanism of self-referential mind keeps us involved in a social situation constantly. Think about what you mean when you say something like, I thought to myself, or I was thinking to myself. Who are you talking to? Who are you thinking to? Do you get it? Here is a riddle. Do you know what a riddle is? What's a riddle? Do you know what a riddle is?
Like a puzzle.
A puzzle. What's that in Portuguese?
Riddle, enigma.
Enigma. Okay. So here's an enigma or a riddle to contemplate. If you are the one who is going to receive the thought, why did you have to think it in the first place? You see, when we say I thought to myself, I think it's as if there's somebody else in there. Anyway, I think that's the point. That's the essence of it. Read one other paragraph here. If you let this in very deeply, you might find that your thinking significantly slows down, or even comes to a halt for a significant, astonished interval. By that I mean, you might just be like, oh, and the program stops running. It's like we have a phrase in English: you stick a spanner. I think you call it a chave English, in the machine. The machine's running, you just go, and it just jams up, and you're like, oh my God. That's what I'm talking about. You may notice that you stop indulging in the conversation. You may begin to recognize that so much habitual thinking is pure nonsense and completely unnecessary, and you may notice that you become capable of standing in the naked unity of pure existence. You also become aware that you are happy instantaneously. Could there be a connection? So when you however you do it, when you just step out of that language program, that whole virtual reality, you are instantaneously happy. It's freedom. Liberation from the machine. Lots of people talk about the machine out there, the system. That Pink Floyd song, "Welcome my son, welcome to the machine." But it's not just the machine out there, it's the machine in here. So I just thought I'd drop that one on you.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But can we say that mind, it's not good or bad? It's just a tool that we use in the wrong way most of the time.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's a tool, or you could say a faculty.
Yeah, faculty.
That is completely impersonal. And like you say, it's not inherently good or bad. It's not inherently limiting. And for all the I think obvious reasons, we need a mind to function in this place, and the mind has that capacity of rational thought, deduction, discrimination. All of those things are necessary. And of course everybody is more or less familiar with the functional mind. You buy something, you read the instructions, put it together. In terms of discrimination, that's something that becomes more and more refined the more you awaken. Because it's not just discriminated between, he's Portuguese, he's Spanish, but it's like what's true and what's false, So the capacity to discriminate is something that we definitely need on the spiritual journey. And it becomes more and more refined. And then the other thing I mentioned is what we could call the creative capacity of mind, right? So it becomes a tool for creativity, for creation.
Good way to use.
Yeah. So then we could say the more that one of the signs of awakening would be that most of your mental activity would be about those functions, and it doesn't mean to say that you don't think about things, but you're not thinking about yourself. You're not worrying about yourself. You see, you're not turning in on yourself. So another metaphor I use in the book is the whirlpool. Like the ego is like a whirlpool in the ocean. And there's this big ocean, it's just like me. How am I doing? Does she like me? What do they think of me? Always worrying and concerned about what other people think. How do I look? Anyway, it's endless, right? That whole fascination and preoccupation with me.
It reminds me of Agent Smith in The Matrix.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So the more you give yourself to this passion for liberation and meditation, and I highly recommend making a practice of meditation. It's invaluable.
Is it a good tool to jam the machine?
Yeah, it's a good tool to jam the machine.
The tool.
Yeah, it's the tool. And so it means, so the more you take the time, the more you make meditation a priority, when you're walking and talking, in your life, and you'll have these moments where the machine's doing its thing, and you're suffering for whatever reason, and then there's just a flash of insight, and it's just like, oh, I'm out of the box now, instantaneous. Revelation that I am not this mechanism, you see. And then, of course, it frees you up to respond, not react, or to do something completely spontaneous that you would never do before. And ultimately, it can lead to the complete deconstruction of your life, not only of you and who you think you are, but your whole life, but also a positive, you could say, reconfiguration of your life. So you're no longer a victim of destiny and circumstance and conditioning and what mummy and daddy did to you and what you understand. We're all conditioned robots. I mean, we have this illusory idea in the West that we're independent thinkers. It's not true. Most people are robots, really. Even very intelligent people. They can be the worst, actually, because they're so arrogant. Intelligent people, obviously they know they're intelligent, and they know in terms of intellect, they may be superior to most people. But they can often be just more imprisoned in it and all their ideas and everything. So, see, I would say this is why I could never. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a coach, I couldn't teach men's development outside of this context. Because this dimension that I'm communicating to you, where you can jam the machine, stop the machine, step out of the machine, that's what makes everything possible. Because if we want to once we get into talking about being men and how we're conditioned as men, and there's many layers, we're biologically conditioned, we're psychologically conditioned, we're culturally conditioned, right? And there's different variations in different countries of that. So there's all these, you could say, layers or patterns of conditioning. And it's not about becoming an unconditioned, it's not about becoming an unconditioned being, because that's not really possible, because that's more the idea that's very common in spiritual circles, that you have to stop the mind, you have to eradicate everything, and then you become the enlightened vegetable kind of idea. Because that's the idea. The idea is that the mind is the problem, the fact there is conditioning, cultural conditioning is the problem. No, it's that when you have this access to an awakened consciousness, then you can discriminate. So like, every nationality has its cultural conditioning, right? And, there's a positive and negative side pretty much. Some countries it's a bit more one way than the other, I would say. But, for you to be free of your Portuguese conditioning, right? You only want to be free of the Portuguese conditioning that limits your true expression as a man. And the other stuff is fine. You're Portuguese. Do you see what I mean? It's actually beautiful, in my opinion. Yeah. Yeah. So you become. So you. And then in terms of being men, you know, we can start to look at, well, this whole question of what does it mean to be a man and ways in which we've been conditioned, and we can start to, because we have access to this awakened ground, we can start to feel, well, yeah, that's not really true. That's very limiting, you know. But then we might actually feel into some other aspects where it's like, yeah, that feels really authentic. You know, that feels like who I am. Do you see what I mean? And what it means to be a man. So this is what makes it all possible. This is what makes a very deep investigation, exploration possible. Because otherwise, if you don't have that access to that ground outside the machine, it's just rearranging the machine, you know, sort of, so it runs better.
Like a firmware update.
Yeah, like an update. It's very good. Yeah, it's like a 2.0.
Of the same shit.
Yeah, the same shit basically. Yeah, that's a good metaphor. So you could do an upgrade instead of ripping out the hard drive, you know, and starting again.
Because you can discern and upgrade the machine, because as you said that we have to grow up and also waking up, so I think both are possible.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Was I not saying that, or what were you responding to?
No, okay, it's fine. Yeah. Maybe we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, they're both possible. Yeah, because the context of waking up allows growing up to happen, but from a ground that's inherently free, and it's not about just an upgrade of the existing structure. That's really what we're saying.
Okay.
So let's say the structure that is Gustavo, through giving himself to an awakening process and maybe having a deep exploration into this whole question of being a man, what it means to be a liberated man, you potentially will experience an upgrade in terms of growing up, right? Change.
Sure.
But that growing up will not be sourced in the ego. Yeah. Rearranging the furniture of the ego. Another good metaphor which I sometimes use is living in a house, you know, with several levels, you know, and you know, there's this frustration with the status quo of who you are and your life, you know, and so what a lot of people do is they just try and rearrange the furniture in the house to make it more comfortable and let some more light in, or, you know, when what they really need to do is go up the stairs to the next level. Do you see? But of course that's where fear comes in, because when you go up the stairs, you're leaving the known behind, and there's no guarantees that there's going to be the same furniture up there. You see, that's why it demands courage. I had a teacher, and he had this great line, which he often used to say, is that everybody wants to get enlightened, but nobody wants to change. It's very true. Because enlightenment or awakening implies change. It's not just, you know, your consciousness, so to speak, changing your perception.
And it's like radical.
It's radical.
Change.
Yeah, it's radical change.
Same saying as everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Yeah. Or people only want to die if they know they're going to go to heaven. Either way. Yeah. But that's a good example. So what this whole notion of heaven, it's the same projection of the the ego into some kind of spiritualized idea of an afterlife. But when people would talk about going to heaven, or or the soul in that sense, it's usually still very much tied to how me personally. I am personally still going to continue somehow in some kind of recognizable form, but I'll be in heaven. Do you see? So it's all an avoidance of death, of ego death, and the fact that when if we don't let go of it before the body dies, then we will be afraid when the time comes, as most people are. But when the physical body dies, it will all be ripped off, regardless. We'll survive. Who we really are will survive death. But everything that we're attached to in terms of our identity.
You're speaking about soul.
Well, I don't want to get into speaking about soul, really. I'm just talking about consciousness itself.
Okay.
Who we really are is prior to everything that appears. So in that deepest sense, we've never been born either. This is a phrase you'll often hear a lot enlightened masters say, I'm never born, never died, in the deepest depth.
Mm-hmm.
Is free from the round, as they call it in Buddhism, the round of birth and death. It's going round and round, and lifetimes upon lifetimes. And so in that idea, or that cosmology, it's freedom is getting off the wheel.
Yeah.
Can I challenge something you said?
Yeah, sure.
Invited earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is something I've struggled with for a long time. What you described as the enlightened vegetable.
Mm.
I kind of thought to erase the ego was the point. But I'm in what you're saying. I'm seeing that actually just like discernment is important, and you become better at it when you have the freedom, you have the access to the enlightened consciousness. Also, it seems like ego is also quite important. It's almost synonymous with mind. You say you're not like a therapist or self-development, but I think you have to be, because once I think we all have to be, because once we find out how to jam the programming, and then we have the freedom to choose the conditioning that's not limiting and that enhances ours. That really is how you want to show up in the world. That is how to have a healthy ego. That is personal development on the mental level. But you're doing it from the perspective not of, I need this not to suffer, or I'm just trying to be a little more comfortable and more safe. It's the giving and abundance part, where you're designing an ego and a whatever. So I'm seeing harmony between jamming the programming and rewriting the programming intelligently, not from a place of need and lack, but of freedom to give.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you're saying. I think the only apparent you could say disagreement is just to do with semantics and how we define ego. So there's two definitions of ego. Like the word ego in psychology is used to denote the individual. So the individual equals ego equals I, But in a spiritual context, the ego is that self-contraction, and is not identical to the individual or the mind. Now, when you're when you're in the ego, so to speak, when you are convinced you are an ego, then your body and mind and your sense of your individual expression is expressed as ego, we could say, in whatever shape or form. But when that identification is released, or to whatever degree released, then, so because one way to language it is, like you just said, is then one can develop a healthy ego, right? That's one way to language it. But in spiritual context, you won't normally you'll find that more in a psychological context, because it's just helpful to make a distinction, at least in this context, that what we're calling ego, which in my book I also call edging God out, E-G-O, edging God out. Me, I am the center of the universe, right? That whole movement is what is the cause of not only our suffering, but all of the unnecessary suffering that's happening. It's the cause of the pain of the human condition. And then when that is released, to whatever degree, our individuality and our mind, everything that we are, we're still here as an individual. But then you could say what begins to live us and drive us is not the ego, which implies separation, but you could call it true individuality, or the authentic self, the true self. These are different words that are sometimes used, where who you are as an individual is actually flowers. It becomes not only a lot more healthy, but a lot more creative, more happy, loving, all those things. But it happens precisely because we're renouncing, we're understanding and renouncing this movement. So I think you're pointing at the same thing. Yeah. But it's important to see it's actually a shift of identification, because it's not the ego I kind of trying to embrace this, you see? It's not the ego I turning around and going, oh yeah, now I'm a much better, healthy ego, you see? It's actually, this has to die. The contraction has to...
you would say it was not about eradicating the conditioning.
No, it's what has to die is the identification, not the thoughts or the whatever conditioning might arise. You see, it's the presumption that is me. So of course the most common unquestioned presumption is I am the mind. But if you believe that, there's no way out. There's no way out.
But when you were talking about being a better, you're Portuguese, you embrace. You're talking to Tiago. You're letting go of the things that are limiting, but you get to keep the identification with the things that are positive.
Yeah.
Isn't that amounting to a healthier ego?
Well, you could call it that. If you want to call it a healthier ego, that's fine with me. If that's
but the identification hasn't quite.
What I would say, it's not that. So let's call it the good. What we're calling the good conditioning, or it's not that you're identifying with it.
Okay.
It's just a part of your natural self-expression.
Yeah. You're not fighting it, because that would be.
You're not saying, oh well. Yeah, I kind of like the way that I like this big-hearted, and kindness that I express as a Portuguese. I think I'll identify with that. Yeah, because you're already like that. The Portuguese are already like that. But what the Portuguese maybe do want to let go of is your fear. And the fear of standing out, and the pickiness, and we're no good, and now consigo, and all that bullshit, by the way. Because what I see as a foreigner living here 15 years, you guys, you have so much in your national character that I haven't seen in any other Western culture. Very, very valuable human spiritual qualities. But the most Portuguese don't value it because they're so convinced they're inferior. Just one example. So we could talk about probably every culture, something along those lines. So it's, when you begin to awaken, you see, and you as an American, you see, it's not about, well, I just want to throw out everything about being a man or everything about being American, you know, because it's all limiting. Mm-hmm. No, it's not all limiting. You know, what is limiting is what the individual or collective ego tends to identify with, that limits a free and true expression. Mm-hmm. You see, what I'm suggesting is that the good stuff is it's not so much conditioning in the sense of being identified with it. It's inherently who we are. It's our true nature. And so what we...
That's getting expressed
yes,
in American or Portuguese.
Yeah. And this is very important because it's actually very, very relieving, because then you accept yourself very deeply, you know. It's not like, you know, you're a man, you grew up in a certain place, you had a certain background. It's not like you've got to sort of eradicate all of that and start again. It's like, no, these are all dimensions of who I am as an individual. Mm-hmm. But I'm interested in being an awakened man, American man, whatever. And then you get interested in, wow, well, I wonder what that is. I wonder what that's going to look like. I don't know, you see. Then you're on a adventure, you could say, finding out. Yeah. And once you start finding out, you experience liberation. You experience some degree of freedom, of getting out of the box, you know. And it's not about coming to an end, you see, because once you start to experience that freedom, that's the goal, you know. There's happiness, there's freedom, there's space, there's creativity, but you know, and then there's more. Mm-hmm. It's a sort of spiraling upward, you could say, and you start enjoying the process, enjoying the show, you know, instead of like wanting to become an enlightened vegetable and get out of here. You see, this is where all the traditional spirituality, all of it, East and West, has got it wrong. Because all traditional spirituality, whether it's Christianity, Buddhism, whatever, it's all ultimately about getting out of here. Mm-hmm. Whether it's, you know, the fallen, we're all original sinners here, you know, it's a fallen world, and if we're lucky and do what the church says, we might go to heaven. Right? But then even in the East you have this whole idea of samsara, and it's like illusion, and you know, this is all an illusion, you know. So, you know, I mean, what they do have in the East is they have an understanding of enlightenment and this possibility of realizing our true nature is prior to and beyond all this. But a lot of people get stuck there in this kind of getting out of here, and there's a subtle or not so subtle denial of our embodiment, of this play, you see. It's only an illusion, it's only a illusory, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, because very much in the Eastern teachings, it's this sense of like samsara. It's dangerous. It's always potentially going to tempt you. You see, so you don't want to get involved in it. So best to just be a monk and be celibate and have one meal a day. You know, keep things as simple as possible, right? So there's some truth to that. I was very attracted to that. Very attracted to it, actually, as I shared. But then there's, you know, maybe that kind of orientation might serve one for a while if you need to detach yourself from a lot of complexity, right? It might be positive to simplify your life in that way. But then it can very subtly become a denial. And it's like, I don't want to play anymore, you see. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? So my whole understanding, my quote personal journey it's been very much about, you could illustrate it by a circle. So if down here you've got the egoic presumption of being a separate self and a personal journey and all of that, and then you start to awaken and come out of that, and you could say at the top of the circle, it's when you realize, oh my God, that never existed. I never was that limited person. I've always been free, right? And you could call that enlightenment or awakening. But then a lot of teachings and teachers, even individuals, they stop there, because you're on the top of the mountain. You've got a very big view. It's very peaceful. You're just looking down and going, yeah, I can see very clearly up here. Don't really want to come down though. Do you see? Don't want to come down into the body, into life, into the play. This is sometimes symbolized by the marketplace in spiritual stories, going up to the mountain, and the real challenge of your awakening is, can you come down into the so-called marketplace and be a human being who's in the world and living a full human life. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're interested in. That's what this project's about.
But without so much fear involved.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's really, one way to define that coming full circle is the transcendence of fear. Yeah. So that you can inhabit your individuality, your Portugueseness, your everything about yourself, free from fear.
Yeah. I during the 10-day retreat, at some point we had this Holland small
Mm-hmm.
group with some questions, and one of the questions was, what is ego? And I very instinctively answered, it's fear.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's the emotional mood of ego, of this. It's fear. So, of course, when we're actually registering fear emotionally, whether it's terror or just anxiety, right? We're aware of the ego, you could say, being fear, the emotional mood of fear, right? But when we're experiencing arrogance, so some people, the Portuguese tend more to fear. Let's just make a generalization. The Americans tend more to arrogance. Okay. So do the British, by the way. So pride, so the different faces of ego, you see. So fear, inferiority, just anxiety. That's one face. But another face is pride, overconfidence, sort of, hey man, yeah, I'm good, man. We're good. Hey, but often you see underneath that pride is fear. Yeah. But people who are conditioned in that way, and also culturally conditioned, they're often not aware of it. But you find out when you start to poke it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So it's a facade, you see. So you can reduce the sort of emotional quality of ego to fear on one hand or pride on the other.
It's like a mask to hide the fear underneath.
Yeah, because it's the way it's pride is it's the assertion of a separate self, and it's aggressive. Because the truth is this. So even if how the ego presents itself is kind of fearful and inferior and I'm not good enough, and it's still actually aggressive from a certain point of view. It's an aggressive assertion of me. I'm a victim. I'm inferior, you see. So we tend to equate pride more with superiority and arrogance, right? But you looked at in a deeper way, all insistence on being separate and having a problem, a special problem, is pride. It just has different flavors. Take your pick. Also anger, right? Yeah. What is underneath anger?
Fear.
Fear, yeah, usually. But there can be another form of anger, which I like to call sacred fire. And what's underneath that is care. Ferocious care. You know, and the willingness to stand up against injustice and all the rest of it. And we need that, especially as men. So this is just one thing that we as men have lost touch with. You see, this whole kind of sense of anger is a negative. You know, that intensity of the anger and that emotion is, we can't go there. We can't allow that as men, because of course the fear is that we'll be macho jerks, macho dominating. You know, men. How we've seen a lot of that. We don't want to be like that, do we? Because we're sensitive guys. You know. But in that process of becoming big-hearted, sensitive men, we often deny these kind of energies that are innate, you know, and needed, desperately needed.
If put it to good purpose.
Yes, yeah. It's to do with being the warrior, the warrior energy. We had our celebration. You were here, right?
Yeah.
So, for those of you that weren't, which is most of you, we had a celebration as we do every year recently. And the men, we did a performance, and we all dressed up as warriors. It was a lot of fun. It was amazing. We had capes and black underpants. I had golden underpants because I was the king. So I had a king and everyone. So we enacted this play, and of course it was very humorous in a certain way, but also we were enacting something very real about what we're discovering as men, which is bringing this warrior, you could say warrior spirit, online or back online, you know, recovering it from the past, but obviously in a form that's about serving the whole. And so that's one of the things, you know, has a how to say. So if we are able to allow, so let's talk about anger, fear. They're the most intense ones. Sexual lust, right? Can't get more intense than that and powerful than that, right? So when those emotions are just identified with, right, they take over. We lose control, so to speak, and we become rage is when anger comes out of control. We're terrified, or we become just a sexual animal who could potentially rape a woman, or will objectify a woman, and it'll be about getting our own pleasure, right? So those three areas, in most traditional spiritual approaches, you see, they are recognized as being, dangerous, right? We need to become more conscious, but they're often denied. You see, repressed, and same with anger, like I was just saying, but also sexuality and fear. You see, when you really allow yourself to feel fear, but without collapsing, it's very enlivening. It's you can feel completely alive, you know. It's like a metaphor I always think of is, imagine you're in a war, and you're a parachuter. You parachute into enemy territory, right? And and you've got your disguise, and you're pretending you're whoever. But imagine every moment you're awake, right? So that's one metaphor for what you could say it would mean to be spiritually awake, you know. But the fear can, when it's embraced, is a source of great clarity. You know, you become super aware in a way you would not ordinarily.
Pete, is it possible to fight as a warrior without being angry or feeling angry?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's not only to do with that. But we'll go more into that. We're going to go more into that tomorrow.
If the context changes, life as you know it is from one day to the other changes. Everything changes, and all of that energy comes out.
Yeah, it's really whatever is required in any moment. So a sort of positive. So this teaching of letting everything be as it is, right? So it means anger arises instead of like, I shouldn't be feeling this, right? It's like, no, it's here. This is what is. Allow yourself to feel it. And then, of course, the challenge is not to just unconsciously dramatize it. You open a bigger space in yourself to conduct that energy. That's why the breathing is also important. Okay, so why? And then you start to get in touch with why, what is behind this anger, and you might then you can start to discriminate. Actually, it's just my fear.
Is it useful or not?
Yeah, or actually, it's like no, a strong response is called for right now, and it's not me as an ego calling for it. It's consciousness itself is calling. And you see, this is the way we can start to positively own our emotional experience, you see. Liberate it.
So I thought about that bit like a couple of times, about some situation that required for you to be angry, even though I wasn't feeling to be angry in that moment. For example, if dreams kind of mess up with my flights, and I couldn't get into the flight, and it was like €500 that I still have to pay me back. So the time when I have to call them, right, to the customer service, like
the poor little girl.
I know she didn't know nothing, but it's like, and I am not angry actually because I'm kind of like accepting things as they are, but in this kind of situation, to act, like you're angry, so the other person could just like.
Yeah. Do you know what I do in situations like that? What I do in situations like that is, as I say, look, I'm not directing this at you, but I want them to hear how I feel, because something needs to be done, But because you don't just want to unload on the poor person, but also if you don't actually express yourself strongly, then nothing might happen.
Also, a situation in Sri Lanka, this friend that I have over there, she's a manager in this yoga accommodation place, and yes, she had like some issues with the employees, they were locals from there. She doesn't know how to be a leader or how to express in that way, right? And it's what I tell her, right? Like, even if I don't feel angry, if they, they get some stuff from the food or whatever, just, tell them things right, even faking that you are angry, so they, listen, and they, kind of like get into lane, so to speak.
Well, whatever. Whatever's the right thing. So I'm not sure about faking it, but you see, this is also everything I'm saying about awakening and liberation in terms of how we respond in life. It starts to become more and more direct and simple, because as long as you're lost in the ego and you're worried about what other people think and all the rest of it, it's like, so there's a situation and then you have all these possibilities. Well, I could do that, but if I do that, she might not, but if I do that, but then if I express my, and this is all kind of going on usually at a pre-thought level. We're in an emotional knot, and then the ego's, you're trying to do the right thing according to other people and social conventions and all of that, you see. So the more you liberate yourself from all of that, you see, and the more you trust and willing to take risks, you see, the more you just respond. Bam. Yeah. And it's like shooting an arrow, and then you see what happens, and you allow yourself to respond, spontaneously, and then you might find in retrospect, I just missed the target a little bit. So it was important that I strongly express that to that person, but there was a little bit of an edge there because I had some resentment.
And you realize of that.
You see? But you realise that something pure that you wouldn't have said otherwise, you see, because you actually took the risk. Something important came through. And then maybe you say to the person after, because maybe they heard you. Oh, right, yeah, I get what you're saying. And you say, yeah, I'm sorry, it was a little bit intense because I realised, there was a build-up of resentment, you see. This is kind of how we live here. Just this kind of thing. This is how it really gets down to the nitty-gritty of human relationships, right? But you have to take the risk to liberate yourself, liberate your responses. And you might, sometimes you might just miss the target completely. Oh, fuck, I'm sorry. I was completely wrong, it's my shit, actually. That's where that was coming from, right? Yeah. But again, if you hadn't taken the risk, you wouldn't find that out. And then there'll be more and more times when you just hit the bullseye. And in those moments, there's immense trust because you realise, I know what to do. Not my ego mind, there's an natural intelligence, care, spontaneity that can respond, very precisely, and even sometimes with strength, but it can be sourced in love, you see. And the more you start to discover that, then of course, obviously, the more you trust that. Intuition, yeah, true intuition. Yeah. I say true intuition because intuition's a bit of a dodgy word, especially in spiritual circles, because people often say, well, I was just following my intuition, and then it's like you can't criticize them. It's my intuition, it's sacred. Okay. But what your intuition is and how pure it is depends on your degree of freedom from the ego, and so there's a lot of people who are always going on and on about their intuition, and they're just spiritual egomaniacs, basically justifying everything they do because it's my intuition. But no, it's your fucking ego. You're just spiritualizing it. We used to have people or volunteers like this because now we have a much stricter screening process with the volunteers, But in the early days, we had a website and we said meditation and we're interested in. We had a vision, but often we get these people come in and we have a schedule, and meditation, then work, and we sometimes had these types, well, it doesn't really feel in the flow for me today.
Now they get sick.
Yeah. Well, isn't this a spiritual community, They didn't last long, those kinds of people.
Oh, yeah.
Can we or will we talk more about how to use those difficult emotions, anger?
Yeah, we will. Yeah. Any other questions about anything I've shared today?
Maybe you can give a short example of what you are saying, or what you mean when you're saying about discriminating.
Discriminating.
Because for me, and for the Dutch people, it's like a bad meaning. You can't discriminate others.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, that's usually because discrimination is implied to be judgment.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're asking this.
Yeah.
So this is very common in postmodern culture. It also it connects with the whole matter of men's development, because and Holland is probably one of the most postmodern cultures on the planet, along with Scandinavia, right? So postmodern culture, the holy grail, you know what I mean by the holy grail, the sacred cow of postmodern culture, is we are all equal.
Gender neutral.
Everything is the same. Everything's equal. And as with everything, as with all the cultural developments, you have the ones that we can all be aware of are traditional culture, which is still very present here in Portugal, much less so in Northern Europe. But traditional culture, modern culture, and postmodern. They're all at war with each other. So it's the culture wars. And what you have in Holland is the dominant cultural wave is postmodern. That's the dominant one. And the good side, of course, they all have a good side. They all emerged with some very important and positive values. So postmodernism, of course, it was civil rights, it was feminism, it was, standing up against dominator culture, dominator hierarchies, right? Care for the environment, right? So it's on the positive side, it's a magnification of care and sensitivity. It's only postmoderns who are vegetarians, for example, in general, you see, or care for the environment. It's because the postmodern consciousness in that sense is more developed than the modern or the traditional, in that sense, right? But the downside of postmodernism, which is part of the crisis of our times right now, is that ideal of egalitarianism, because that's really, it's about women need to be equal, so blacks, no, racism, indigenous, everybody needs to be included, right? So when that is, like any idea or ideology, when it's, no matter how good it is, as an ideal, because that's a positive ideal, but when it becomes an ideology that's superimposed, it's very dangerous, and it distorts and limits authentic human expression. So this is why in postmodern culture, thou shalt not judge. To judge another is a sin, because that implies that you know better than somebody else, or maybe there's some superiority, inferiority, right? It implies some kind of hierarchy, you see. So the postmodern mind is vehemently anti-hierarchy. It's very strong in Holland. You even have that thing about the tulips, cutting down the tulips, right? Yeah. So they're all the same size.
Oh,
so,
okay, yeah.
So I'll get to what you're saying. So how this relates to discrimination is because that ideal has become an ideology, right? A presumed superior ideology. When someone like you or Dutch people or postmodern people hear the word discriminate, or that the suggestion that there's something higher and maybe something lower, that not everything is the same. There's a visceral no. There's a presumption, a visceral emotional presumption that that capacity to discriminate equals domination, judging another, putting another in a box, coming from an egoic position, right? And of course, Jesus apparently said, "Thou shalt not judge," right? And that's often people say, "Well, you shouldn't judge. Who are you to judge?" Right? But then he also went into the temple and turned the tables over. Was he judging then? He was a rebel, right? He was taking a position. Was he judging? You see, so it breaks down. You see, there's a contradiction at the heart of it. So the postmodern wants to insist that everything's equal, we're all equal, and also, by the way, wants to insist that men and women are the same, fundamentally. And this is all part of the depolarization of the sexes. And it's not true. Yes, in the deepest spiritual sense, we are the same, as I've been sharing. But when that ideal of equality, of sameness, is superimposed as an ideology on life, there's all kinds of very important dimensions that get flatlined. You know what I mean? Everything gets flatlined.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I'm calling discrimination is not judgment in that sense. But you could also call it judgment. It depends how we would be using the word. Because the truth is, you are judging all the time. So this whole bullshit, you know, people say, oh, you shouldn't. Everybody is judging all the time. Everybody is making distinctions and judgments about others and situations, hang on a minute, all the time. Pretty much all the time. So then the question becomes, you know, what positions or judgments am I making? And why? Are they true? Or are they just my prejudices? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where discrimination comes in. So without discrimination, there's no way of knowing. You know? I'm just acting something out. You could say to me, thou shalt not judge, and or, you know, there's no way of finding out together, either in as yourself or also together. There's no way for us to find out together. Well, okay, so you have some judgments or convictions about whatever, and so do I, you know. So in this context, when we're interested in freedom, it also means that what we're interested in terms of the very human complexity of life, is what is the highest and deepest perspective that we can take on any given thing or issue, right? How can we come together in the highest and deepest perspective, a perspective that transcends our prejudices or our presumptions?
Yeah.
So you can only do that if you're willing to discriminate, whether it's inwardly or with another. And what that implies is you put your convictions or your judgments, whatever word you want to use, on the table. And then you look at them, so to speak, and through the light, in this context, of freedom, of free consciousness, you know, because you're interested. You don't want to be an egomaniac. You don't want to be prejudiced. You don't want to.
You don't want to be a robot.
Yeah, you don't want to be a robot, right? But at the same time, you don't want to be an enlightened vegetable who's afraid or unwilling to take a position about anything in the world.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of spiritual people think is the enlightened response to the world.
Yeah.
So the paradox is that one way to describe the paradox of the awakened condition is that what we're awakening to is no position. So what I mean is in the awakening to consciousness itself, free from ego, ego implies a specific point of view and all of its ideas and convictions. So when we let go of that, you could say we enter into a consciousness of no position. We've got nothing to defend, nothing to assert, you know. There's just freedom, there's space, there's love, there's communion. Even with someone who holds radically different political views to you, you can still love them because you're in touch with a dimension that transcends all of that. Yeah? So that's what I mean by no position. And that's the source of love and understanding, compassion. There's no position. But as long as we are an individuated, embodied human being in this world, we cannot avoid taking a position in time and space. Because even if we would say, well, I'm not going to take a position, that's still taking a position. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the spiritually minded folks, that's what they tend. Well, I don't take positions. I don't judge. But that's actually a position.
Yeah.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
So in getting back to postmodern culture, and this is why so many people, and believe me, I know so many of them, who are very, very intelligent, you know, progressive people, caring about all kinds of important things, are apparently unable to discriminate when it comes to being willing to distinguish between what is higher or deeper, because it implies there's further to go, right? So the postmodern ideology of equality that appears very benign on the outside, it's actually the biggest barrier to the higher evolution of the human race that exists. And its most extreme expression these days is in this whole wokeism, you know. So, okay, yes, some people are authentically gay and some people are authentically transgender. You know, we actually have a guy in our men's group who's still embodied as a woman. He's going through the whole process, right? We also have a homosexual in our men's group. So, of course, those minorities, let's say, exist. But do we all? Can we not use? So now we can't use pronouns anymore, and we can't have women's and men's toilets, you know, because these transgenders people are somehow going to feel marginalised. It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah, true.
You could get me going about this. I could go on all night, you know.
Me too.
Well, I'm glad you agree with me. Yeah. So do you see? But do you see the point? It's like the insanity, and this because this is intelligent, progressive people, you know, behind this kind of wokeism. Oh, we have to pull that statue down because that man who did something great historically, but he also had kept slaves, you know. But that's what everybody did back then. It was just how life was, you know. You know, maybe if we had that idea, then, you know, in a few hundred years they'll be tearing down all the statues of people who ate meat. Oh, but he wasn't a vegetarian. Tear it down.
It's just erasing history.
Yeah, but it's self-righteous. It's so egoic, you see, because it's the contradiction at the heart of postmodern culture is you have to be tolerant of all peoples and all views and all races and all cultures, right? But as long as you agree with me, and if you don't, you know, then it can get very ferocious, you see. So as long as you don't dare to suggest that there's something higher, because that's a judgment, because I feel judged, you see. You see, because you're not accepting me as I am, because you're suggesting that, well, maybe there could be more, you see. So a lot of, in postmodern circles, and we come up a lot against this in the work we're doing, because there's often this reflex of, you know, you give someone feedback, right? If you're interested in this process together, you have to trust your brothers, right? You're giving each other reflection. Well, you know, you're doing this, you know. But if you're holding on to any feeling, well, you're you know, the ego will just want to say, oh, you're judging me, you know, or well, you're not enlightened yet, so who are you to say that to me, you know? Right. Yeah. So this whole thing of not judging, it's impossible, and it's absurd. But then what becomes important is, what judgments am I making and why? And are they true, or are they more accurate than something else? And that's where discrimination comes in. So the faculty of discrimination is what enables us to inquire, and it can get very subtle, you know, into what is more true, you know. What perspective is higher and deeper? What perspective is more inclusive, right? You could say horizontal dimension, inclusive, but doesn't deny verticality. You know, that we're here to evolve, to change, to grow. We're not finished yet, for Christ's sake. I hope not, because otherwise we'll destroy ourselves for sure, right? But the postmodern, you know, the postmoderns are all caring about the planet and da-da-da-da-da. You know, but when it comes to actually ego and going beyond ego, it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
bit. Maybe. So the word, I think I heard it before. It's in Spanish. I don't know if maybe you have also in English one word similar that could fit better. Is discernir.
Discern, it's the same.
The same. The same discrimination.
Yeah, it's essentially the
But
same.
in Portuguese, it's not.
No?
Portuguese is not. Yeah.
What's the difference?
Discernir, discernment,
Mm-hmm.
actually imply it's like you are having a capacity to discern your conditioning,
To
the
see the
conditioning of the world,
To see the truth,
to see
yeah.
the truth, and the word discrimination, it also implies a little bit of like pointing the finger. It's a little bit like if you are discriminating someone,
Mm-hmm.
it implies a bit of racism or cynicism. Or
Yeah, well, it can have both means in English. Obviously,
Yeah.
you can discriminate against someone.
Yeah. But
the
we don't have the against. The word just means that
Mhm.
in Portuguese.
Okay,
Maybe that's,
but discriminate in English can also just mean You
discernment, maybe.
you can see that those two things aren't the same. You can discriminate between the two. Yeah.
Distinguish, maybe?
Distinguish, again, that's another good word. Yeah. But you see, that's the capacity to tell the true from the false, and we need that.
Oh yeah.
And the further you go, it becomes more subtle, and what you maybe thought was true before, and you realize, wow, yes,
It's truer than the previous.
truer than but now I'm aware of a higher and deeper perspective that's more true than that. You see, so what we could call the discerning intelligence, whatever we want to call it, it's a function of mind that is if we want to use the hand again, there's pure consciousness, right? And then we could say there's different layers, you could say. Like in the Hindu tradition, they even talk about this. They talk about the sheaths. So a sheath is like a kamada, a layer, right? And they all have, I think usually there's 5. So there's the gross physical, the food body, right? That's the obvious one. Then there's the prana, or the chi, or the life body, right? When that has to do with the breath and the nervous system and all of that, right? It has to do with life force. But then there's the layer of, I can't remember the names now, but what we would call lower mind, right? Mind and emotion. The average experience of mind and emotion, verbal mind, right? So that you could say that's the 3rd layer. And these also develop as we get older, right? So a baby is only aware of the gross physical, right? And then children, they bring online this more life energy, subtle energy. I mean, of course, a baby's alive, but what they're concerned about is the gross physical. And then as we grow up and we develop the capacity for mentality, but also personal will. Right, so these layers kind of come online as we grow up, and most people stop there. The average adult, what we call adult, it's those 3 layers. You with me? Physical, etheric, energetic, subtle in the sense of life energy, and then the mental, verbal mind, and the sense of a personal will. You can call it the 3 stages of life. But then when it goes beyond that, you're entering into more territory or dimensions of consciousness that take you beyond the knot of the ego, right? So in the Vedanta Hindu tradition, the discriminating intelligence is the layer after the verbal mind. It's sometimes called the higher mind. So the higher mind is more in contact, or is an expression of the pure consciousness. Do you see? Because it's to do with discernment. It's to do with what's true, what's false. If you don't have that, then you never change. You see, you become the three-dimensional machine.
Like a compass.
Yeah.
Can you say critical thinking?
Yes. I mean, critical thinking is a form of what we could call discernment. But again, who's doing the critical thinking, you know? Again, you know, you can be a philosopher, that, you know, like the postmodern philosophers, and deconstruct everything and say everything is meaningless because it's all culturally created, and that's my critical thinking, you know. But what?
Just the ability to inquire.
Well, I would say the ability to inquire is on the way, you know. So, as we all know, most people who are very egoic, they don't really inquire or question anything about anything, right? And then you get people who are a bit more critical thinkers, you know. But then there's a whole spectrum to that. It only really becomes a faculty that's a servant of spirit when your critical thinking or your capacity to discern is motivated by the truth, the longing for truth, the longing for freedom, not just to deconstruct things, you know, so you can feel superior to everyone else. So there are a lot of very progressive critical thinkers who are equally lost in ego as stupid people.
I said this because maybe this how do you say
postmodern.
Yeah. Maybe they don't want us to think too much for ourselves, just to accept.
Well, that's the irony. That's the irony of it, because postmodern culture began as a rebellion against modern culture. That's why it's called postmodern, right? Postmodern culture defines itself in reaction to modern, right? And what is it reacting to? Rational thought, you know, scientific materialism, you know. We're here, it's all about success, and, right? You get the idea, right? We're all postmoderns. We've all come out of postmodern culture. Otherwise, we wouldn't be interested in this. We'd be making money. We'd be watching TV, you know. So there's the positive side of postmodern culture, which is about there's something more than all of that, right? But then you see when a positive cultural movement becomes calcified. Do you know what I mean by calcified? Do you understand that word?
Yeah.
It's like something that was originally very vibrant, alive, you know, and people were marching in the streets, civil rights, you know. These were big things happening, very positive, you know, standing up to the establishment, big changes, right? You don't see anything like that now. I mean, it is happening, you know, but the media aren't reporting on it, of course.
But it also came out of questioning.
Yeah, but that's the thing. People, the postmodern people have become predominantly conformists, because postmodernism has become the new cult mind, you could say, you know, and so that's why we desperately need the next cultural wave. You know, it's most commonly called integral. It's one name for it, but it's inherently has to be about some degree of spiritual awakening. You see, and that's the crisis that we're in. You know, and it's very interesting times. You know, because we're facing. It's going to be it's breakdown or breakthrough, and it's in the balance. You know, and. You know, it's a perilous time, but it's also a very, potentially a very positive time in terms of leaps forward.
End of cycle.
End
of cycle.
The end of a cycle, yeah. I think it is. So then, you know, it's a nice thing to end with tonight, because then we start to see our awakening, our spiritual awakening, and also our development as men, you know, becoming awakened, integrated, strong men, in a much bigger context than just me. Yeah. So all the benefits that we can experience are real and true, but they'll be byproducts of a much deeper purpose, you know. Because if you really awaken, you can't see yourself outside of the whole, you see. What you start to recognize very directly is, I am the human race. Because there is no separation. I am the human race. Right, and then take it the next level down, and I am a man. Right? So the evolution of the human race and the evolution of mankind depends on me. That's the responsibility. Most people, they don't want to have that on their shoulders. You see? But that's what it means to take it all the way. And actually, when you become willing to take that on your shoulders, it ennobles your life. It ennobles, and it straightens your life. You're tapped into an immense power and a source of inspiration and passion. Because it's not about you anymore. It's not about you getting enlightened or being an integrated man as a separate self. Your individuality deepens and flowers, but that's a byproduct of your surrender, your sacrifice for the bigger picture. And then, the more you get in touch with that, it speeds up the process, I can tell you. Really, because it's not on your terms anymore. You know what I mean? And the ego hates that. The ego always wants it on my terms, Yeah, I want my spiritual life, meditation. Wow, great, yeah. But it's like, the evolution of the human race depends on me. I'm not ready for that yet. I need a bit more time.
For me, Pete, also, when I had that awakening in Australia, it was through meditation. And it was like 2 months that I was like that overflowing of love that he was saying the other day. I got so passionate about it. It was so transformational. I was like driving crazy everyone. You have to meditate, right? You have to be aware of your thoughts, And over time I realized that wasn't the way, right? But what you say about novels, and your life, like becoming a mindfulness teacher, mindfulness meditation teacher, and just teaching people in that, for me, just give like so much purpose, as you say, enriches a lot your life.
Yeah, the difference is that because that's the kind of image. I experienced it too. When you first discover these possibilities, you can become a missionary.
Oh yeah.
Right? And but you can't. That's when the ego kind of gets a bit mixed, because freedom has to be freely chosen by every individual. So what you can do though is be yourself, and in that way demonstrate what's possible, and you can respond to people's interest, but you can't convert people, and you don't want to do that.
The first years I was trying to convert everyone.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Not the way.
But then the more that you forget about saving the world in that sense of converting everyone and just be yourself, the more you become a magnet, actually. You start to connect and meet with people, just like you've come here, you see. This whole what we are is frequency. Like attracts like. And so I always say, if you get engaged in this process, it will mess with your life, and you'll probably have to leave some relationships behind, and you might end up changing where you live and your job, but life will bring you those that are vibrating on your frequency. You see, and that's
much more fun.
Much more fun, yeah.
Oh, yeah.